First, let's go to Adam Brandon of Freedomworks CEO, who thinks that what's happening in China is a clear indication, or should be, to us about what we should not be doing. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And if you look in the last 10 years, one of the great misassumptions that we've made is that U.S. housing prices will always go up. And when they didn't, well, we saw the obvious results. Same thing, I think, too many of the global markets and governments believe, well, China's always going to grow. But China's got some underlying structural problems that are finally starting to come up. And the big cause of that is debt. China's a lot more in debt than people realize, and a lot of their investment has not been from this, or a lot of their growth has not been from the growth of the middle class, but it's been from debt. And I think fundamentally we've lost track of that growth should come from savings and investment. And there's a big difference between debt and savings and investment.
Well, Adam, I think there's an even simpler point here. When the government gets involved in capital markets and free capital markets, somebody somewhere is going to try to fiddle with those markets. And there's been a lot of fiddling going on in the Chinese markets. And the Chinese people and the world economic community is beginning to catch on to that it is a fixed market. It has been a fixed market for a long time. The insiders get out just before the market crashes.
Absolutely.
They get in at the lowest point. Somebody's getting to fix here.
Well, what's amazing to me is, so China in the late 70s, when they opened up to the world, they adopted a pretty raw form of capitalism, and it lifted millions of people out of poverty. So now that they're having this problem, they're looking through the economic textbooks, and they're going straight to a hardcore Keynesian approach.
Well, they're going to, but it's even beyond that, because after all, it is a communist government. They have certain advantages that even Keynesian democracies don't have in terms of ability to fix markets and ability to fix information systems. They can clog up an information market so that individual investors don't have access to information that the insiders do. They don't have an SEC like ours.
And they also have if you look at their banking sector, their big four banks are so heavily controlled by the central government. They're almost policy branches of the government instead of free banks. And with that, you're going to have a lot of corruption. The local and the mid-level cities are piling on tons and tons of debt to try and keep their real estate market from popping. And think of the effects for places like the United States. We can't balance our budget without the Chinese buying our T-bills. What is the long-term effect if China slows going to be on our own debt situation?
Well, you tell me, what is that long-term effect?
You know, I've always been scared that what's going to happen when just U.S. interest rates revert to a normal 4 or 5%. That's going to blow hundreds of billions of dollars away in our debt. And then you add on to that, if no one's buying that deficit, we're talking about cuts right now, and everyone's scared in Washington about making a 1 or a 2% cut. Imagine if overnight we have to make 10% cuts just across the board. This is why it's so important to get spending under control now in this country before some of these crises hit.
All right, bottom line with China, we saw a 6% drop last night. We've seen a lot more than that over the past several months in China. What happens to their capital markets? Do they go down to zero?
That's a great question. My guess is they're sitting on all this cash pile of foreign reserves, and somehow that's going to be leveraged into the banking system to eat up bad debt. Because there's probably, I don't know the numbers because they're impossible to find, but there's probably a few $1 trillion in bad real estate debt, bad margin calls, bad debt all across the country. And someday, I'm going to quote Margaret Thatcher, the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And China may be running out of other people's money.
Adam Brandon, Freedomworks CEO. Adam, thank you very much.